Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Coast and to the project Occasional 2. The most interesting attractions aren't always close to the main path. Often there are some hidden gems to discover along the side trails. In the last episode we completed the scenery around the Wild Mouse. Today we'll continue the path and focus on another attraction. Well, to attract guests to this part of the park, we need one of the so-called higher-rated attractions. I'm adding a taller wall around it to hide the fact that this attraction doesn't completely match the style of the Mythology Area. Okay, to be honest, this is one of my favorite attractions. In any amusement park, no matter which one, I always end up here. Let me clarify. I love this carousel as long as it's moving forward. When it goes backwards, my enthusiasm for this attraction is, well, quite limited. Of course, just placing the carousel isn't enough. We also need an attractive queue and an inviting exit. For the queue, there aren't many options, so it simply winds through nature. As a boundary, I chose a simple low stone fence. The exit, on the other hand, is a bit different. Usually guests expect to visit a restroom after experiencing an attraction. Near the small picnic area, we also provide drinks to help guests recover from all the excitement. Here in this area, we are on the, quote, other side of the transportation ride. Originally, the ride was meant to serve as a park boundary, but of course that doesn't have to be a strict rule or something. I think it's nice when the transport ride offers something to see on both sides instead of just one preferred side. Well, I suppose everyone has their own preferences here. We'll also be working on 2 additional areas, but before we get into that, I'll take a short break. And folks, this is one of those episodes divisible by 5. You know what that means? It's time for the Planet Coaster theme song. Not just one, but several. Whatever, I'll be right back. Again, I managed to complete 2 more buildings. First one, we are nearing the exit of the Mythology Area, but most importantly, the bridge construction for the transport ride. This area needs a small capital building which will serve another purpose, blocking the incoming guest's view of what lies ahead in this area. A second small area is the corner by the wild mouse. Right now, I feel like I'm building too many long paths with few cross connections. To change this, we are starting with a small area where guests can wander around. Hey, it's a start, okay? Oh, one last point. I mentioned in the last video, I guess, that the cinematic shots tend to get a bit choppy since I run Plan Coaster and OBS on the same computer. Good news, everybody! I've found a solution. You won't see this improvement immediately, as I've already recorded some footage ahead of time, but hey, it's coming. And with that, we are almost at the end of today's video. Almost. Of course, as always, we'll take a look at a summary of what we've achieved today. But for now, it's time for me to say goodbye. Thank you for stopping by and see you in the next episode of Occasional 2.